Yuki Tsunoda's miserable showing continued in Silverstone, where he finished dead last even with 4 drivers outside of the competition. The Japanese driver is now under a lot of scrutiny, and it seems like he's going to be facing a lot of competition not just for 2026, but for 2025 as well. But will Red Bull change the approach for Tsunoda? And more importantly, is there a future for him outside of Red Bull? The situation in Red Bull is becoming very critical. Apart from the poor performance of Max Verstappen, they now have to deal with the never-ending crisis of that second seat. The Japanese driver finished the Silverstone Grand Prix with a 10-second penalty after his crash with Behrman. And even with drivers like Antonelli, Hajar, and Lawson out of the race, he wasn't able to cover much ground. What is even more worrying is that he doesn't really seem to have an answer to all of the trouble this imposed on him from the RB21. This is where Christian Horner needs to act swiftly. According to the team principal of Red Bull, Tsunoda endured an unlucky weekend because, throughout qualifying, he lacked the boost from the battery of the car. Whereas in the race, the baffling lack of pace came from the incident with Behrman. This is why Horner believes that a new approach is needed with Tsunoda. When talking about this to a greater extent, he went on to say, "We're trying a different approach with him and to try and support him to get the best out of the car, and with perhaps a slightly different setup to that of Max." I think I've just been talking to Eddie Irvine, and it sounded so reminiscent of what he was expecting with Michael Schumacher of Ferrari in the mid-90s. These great and exceptional drivers can drive a car very focused around a super strong front end. Of course, there are very few that can achieve and deliver that. And so, of course, we're trying to make a different route with Yuki just to calm things down for him. But it's not just that. Let's not forget that Tsunoda is more or less invisible from the entire world of Formula One because of his poor performance. This has a massive effect on how he performs week in and week out because now the expectations have dropped massively. Even Hülkenberg has more points than not just Yuki, but both Racing Bulls drivers as well. The situation doesn't look good at all from this point of view. I don't really think something can be changed in the remainder of the season for all of the right reasons. The car is just not on the desired level for any driver not named Max Verstappen. Christian Horner hasn't ruled out the opportunities to replace Tsunoda as early as in 2026 or potentially even a swap in 2025 if this continues the way that it does. Elaborating further on this, Horner has gone on to say, "Obviously, our priority will be to look at what we have within our pool of talent. Yuki's got until the end of the season to demonstrate that he's the guy to remain in the car. We have Isaac Hadjar also doing a good job, and Liam is finding his form as well. So, within the Red Bull pool, we have talent. But of course, you're always open to what's outside of that. We want to find the best lineup that we can go for next year. We've gone outside of that pool in recent years. If we feel the necessity to do so, we wouldn't be afraid to do so again. But there's a big dilemma that Red Bull is facing right here. What should be the benchmark of a second driver that they'd be looking for? Of course, I don't really think that putting a second driver up there from their own pool is a great way to promote a driver, because from this point of view, it does look like a demotion. And this is where we need to just ask that real question. Who needs to be considered as a replacement for Yuki? I know what you're thinking. The most obvious candidate for that seat is Isaac Hadjar. After some strong performances in Racing Bulls, it's only right for Red Bull to look at him and say, "This is our guy." But considering how much of a failure Lawson and Tsunoda have proven to be in the RB21, is this seat really an upgrade compared to the Racing Bulls? But the stats of Tsunoda don't lie. He hasn't made it to Q3 in the past 6 events, dropping out in Q1 and Q2 3 times each. To top that off, he has only 8 points scored as the teammate of Max. And while that's better than the 0 points of Lawson, the Kiwi driver was only present in the team for 2 races. And whether we like it or not, Yuki will be under continuous pressure for the remainder of 2025. The choices are obvious. Arvid Lindblad is literally waiting to be promoted to Racing Bulls. And in order for this to happen, Hadjar would be promoted to the Austrian squad immediately. Yes, this might not be the best scenario for this period of his career, but we know what those seats in the Italian squad are serving for, being promoted in place of the struggling F1 driver, in this case, Yuki Tsunoda. And although we might be looking at a very different landscape in Red Bull, with Max's future being insecure, things will be a bit different for Red Bull's future. But if you were to ask Marco, you'd understand that the plan for Tsunoda is clear. He will see the end of the 2025 season because there's no point in replacing him when the campaign is now more or less done. Verstappen might have a slight chance of fighting in the Drivers' Championship, but Red Bull is total and not really pushing towards better results. P4 is the realistic chance of the Austrian squad if a massive drop in performance doesn't happen in Ferrari and Mercedes' camps. But considering that the two are drivers who can score high, the only way an overtake from Red Bull could happen is if Verstappen wins races again. I don't think he's out of contention for that, but I also don't think that he can be nearly as competitive as he was back in 2024. This is why a big question mark is asked as to whether or not Red Bull should have brought a better driver instead of Tsunoda and potentially gone for an outside hire like Hülkenberg. But when talking about the 2025 season and the drivers' lineup, Marco said the plan is for him to finish the season. Nothing has changed. We also have no alternative. There have been talks with him, also with the engineering team. He was completely out of his depth in Spielberg. We want to stabilize him and no longer set up the car so hard towards Max. That could help him. I don't think that Red Bull doesn't have a choice of drivers. Let's not forget that the Austrian team are now possessing talents of different youngsters, including Arvid Lindblad. The goal for the Brit is to push himself into the picture of being a Red Bull driver sooner rather than later. And I think that's easily achievable considering how poor the competition for the second seat is. It's either Hadjar or Lindblad who will have a lot of preference when it comes to replacing Tsunoda. And that's everything that we need to know about Yuki's future in this team so far. With all of this in mind, do you think Tsunoda needs to be replaced in Red Bull soon? And if so, who do you think is the best candidate to replace him? Let us know in the comments below. And once you do that, make sure to click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now.